KHTS News. I'm After Hours News Director Zena Taher. Today we're here with Selina Thomas. She's a 2022 candidate for the Santa Clarita City Council. She's an HR professional based in Santa Clarita, and she owns a small business here. Selina,
Yes.
thank you for joining
Hi,
us.
Zena. It's nice to see you. Thank you so much. I was so excited.
Of course. So, why did you decide to run for City Council?
Sure. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a small business owner here. Actually, I serve 100 small businesses here in Santa Clarita. And during the height of COVID 2 years ago, many of them encouraged me to run to be a small business voice at the city council level. And then from there, all the other relevant issues that are, if impactful to me as a parent and as a constituent were also the reasons why. So I have three daughters here, all student athletes, and the issues that are touching them and touching us as a family were important for me to advocate and be a voice for, especially the fentanyl crisis that's happening right now. My daughters are smack in the middle of the high risk age group, all three of them. And so it's important to have that voice, someone that's had a successful business and as a stakeholder here. I'm a homeowner, I've raised my kids here. So it's very important to be a voice that has had those experiences directly and been in a leadership role.
So, your main focus is on small businesses, but you're also interested in family issues, which includes the
Absolutely.
fentanyl
This
crisis.
is a family town. I think everyone can agree that they move here for the great schools to raise their families. And so, if there's a crisis for one, there's a crisis for all. And so, I think having had that experience in the last 12 years being a resident here, it was important for me to be able to be a voice for all of those things.
Okay. So I we already talked a little bit about what you think are the most pressing concerns. Can you give me a top three of
Definitely.
what issues you think are the most important to focus on and why in Santa Clarita?
Sure, absolutely. Our fentanyl crisis has been, we're leading in the county now in deaths. Three of the 22, 23 are classmates to my daughter, just graduated in June. And she's off and having a college experience, and certainly this is an issue in this country, but definitely in Santa Clarita being the leading. And so I really feel that it's important to introduce a real plan. And so I have proposed and would propose as a candidate developing a task force that involved law enforcement, medical professionals, our schools, our community members. We have community leaders here, clergy that are already on the front line of this. And then, of course, our youth leaders. They are directly involved in communicating and can relate to kids that are high risk. And I think a task force in attacking this from all fronts is a major priority. So
Okay.
that's number one. Number two, I think obviously we have the business recovery. That is really the antithesis of why I ran the first time and still remains true. I was a voice during the recovery, and I want to be during the crisis, and I want to be a voice for the recovery. And so our small businesses are recovering, we're thriving, but we are dealing with workforce issues that aren't really seen by people, in that people are struggling to come back to work. They've got a different perception of working in person, and that has definitely affected my small business owners in getting people activated and getting their businesses moving again. And then, of course, we have a homeless issue that I think everyone can agree needs to be addressed through more monies through Measure H, having a real collaborative relationship with the county to get what our fair share should be. So those are the top three for me.
Okay, perfect. And when you're talking about recovering for small businesses, you're
Mm-hmm.
referring to recovering from COVID, right?
Absolutely,
Okay,
definitely.
perfect. Just clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
And what skills and experience would you be bringing with you if you were elected?
Absolutely. So as a small business owner that started in a Starbucks right on Copper Hill and Seco Canyon Road, and that was in 2014. So 8 years later, I am now poised to franchise. I'm trademarked. I have 100 businesses in Santa Clarita, small businesses. I have three internationally, just back from Paris, as I mentioned to you. I have a client in Bordeaux, France. So I have a business acumen that is successful in our community, and I think that's important when we're talking about not just the recovery part, but bringing big business here, being an attractive community with leadership that has already established those relationships. I have relationships, strong relationships with our Chamber of Commerce, Valley Industry Association, and some of our current council members. So I'm well versed in that space and well known in that space. I'm SCV's HR guru for the Signal, and so I've made sure that I've continued to position myself to be that voice and advocate. So that certainly lends an experience that is tangible and relatable to anyone that's on the outside looking in, but certainly within our community.
Okay, so you feel like the connections that you built in the community will help you get things done.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think we'll start off with talking a little bit about the fentanyl crisis specifically. So recently, KHTS held a press conference where Santa Clarita Valley Sheriff Station officials said that Santa Clarita is leading LA County in fentanyl-related deaths, which you mentioned earlier. So what do you think the city can do to address this?
Certainly, again, to develop a task force, and these are things that are within a city council member's purview to recommend. And I've done the research on that, and when you have a crisis like this, it does require all hands on deck. And so a task force that would include, as I mentioned, law enforcement because they're on the front line. Some of the overdoses were unintended. So we're not talking about just an addiction issue. We're talking about educating people about exposure. I have a daughter that just went off to college. There was a half a day orientation to awareness regarding fentanyl, and it shook me. I'm scared, and as a parent and someone that is engaged in every aspect of their life, I would be the same way for any other constituent's child in our community. And so I'm afraid for our community that we are not quite there yet in being able to respond in a way that would really have an impact. So I think a task force would absolutely be appropriate. And that, again, would include from the community leaders, our student leaders. We have several that are working already on the front line for this. Clergy, law enforcement, and our institutions to educate our students, not just in our high schools, in COC, in our junior highs. It's a full wraparound approach.
So, do you feel that that task force would be more focused on educating people or more focused on enforcing laws regarding drug possession and drug sales?
Well, the
Things like
task
that?
force is built up of people with different scope. And so those scope, everyone would be accountable for their expertise. And because we have that expertise right here within our community, activating them collectively, collaboratively would be the key. And so having not just that support from the city, but also the resources and commitment from the city would be important. And this is the reason why I would advocate for that right away. As soon as elected, I would advocate for that day one.
Okay, so implementing a little bit of both.
Absolutely.
All right, and then let's move to homelessness. So there was a recent poll that was conducted by the city, and it showed that Santa Clarita residents thought that homelessness was a major issue.
Sure.
So, do you think that the city's offering enough support to unhoused residents, and how would you approach their concerns as a city council member?
I think that the city leadership has already made it clear that we're not receiving our fair share of Measure H monies. And I would step in and be a similar voice in that regard with a different and additional perspective, having been a case manager in Kern County for homeless women and children. So I understand it from the boots on the ground level and understanding that homelessness is not a crime and that there are certain aspects and elements of this that require knowledge in terms of mental health. There are acute situations that are really temporary, and being able to get the funding that allow people to move through that crisis, whatever that may be, is important. And so it's important that we have a knowledge about the different types of homelessness so that we can make sure that the funding that's within Measure H is allocated properly, but allocated to our community in a fair way.
Okay.
So I would take that same approach that's currently being presented by our current city council, which is we need our fair share of the funding. We need real census data that articulates exactly our homeless crisis and that those fundings for those particular issues, from mental health to, I'm a board member for the Wish Education Foundation, and there's a survey that comes out for our students every year. If they're couch surfing, they need to be counted as homeless. And so that census data needs to be used properly in terms of allocating funds just knowing those nuances are very important. It allows me to get to work day one.
So when we're talking about Measure H funding, that's funding that we all pay for through taxes
That
that
we
goes
get back
to the
from the county.
county.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
the county then it sends it and delves it out accordingly. And so making sure that our information is accurate. Having been involved in homeless initiative in Kern County, it was a successful program because the fundings were allocated properly, but also the data it was appropriate. And that's the only way the county will release funds. I think people understanding those different details about how to obtain funding is important.
Okay, so more accurate data collection to make sure that we get the appropriate amount of funding. All right, and then that same poll showed that Santa Clarita residents thought that housing was an issue, overdevelopment in Santa Clarita was an issue. Do you think that it's a problem? And if you do, what would you do to address it?
I think certainly in the survey defining what that means, there are elements of some of the growth that we see within our community that may or may not belong to us. So what's happening on the other side of the five is not within the cities. It's a county issue, and that's not within our purview. But I certainly believe that what's happening currently with the developers is working, and they're being very proactive about setting communities up in a way that they're forecasting the needs from metro transit. There's a recycling, and there's a whole eco plan that's within the Vista Canyon project, and really helping people understand the difference between the two. And I think the city can also be more collaborative in infilling some of the vacant areas within the city and allowing people to focus on that. I work with realtors all the time, not just in my travels in HR, and some of the things that they talk about in terms of our growth is that we don't have the retail and restaurants that they can speak to. We check a lot of boxes as a community. Safe schools, right? Great schools, safe community overall. We have a great community, small town feel. But then there's also those elements that people that are spending what they're spending to live here would like to see, such as a Nordstrom, such as retail that is for the shopper here. I'm one of those shoppers, and I don't want to have to go to Topanga if I can shop here and still support at the same time our small businesses. There's the boutique buyer that we all, that's what's here. And then we have some high-end retail that we can bring here and be a attractive center point in retail, restaurant, and arts. So I think all of those elements are available to us here. We just have to activate them and really become a city that sees that through, not just in our housing development, but in what would support people to come live here. And our realtors speak to that all the time.
Okay, so you're talking about bringing in more business to kind of suit this becoming a bigger city.
Not necessarily a bigger city.
Okay.
I think, and I'd like to introduce that I have like a smart growth initiative where we talk about doing this at a pace that makes sense.
Okay.
And also educating people on the difference between what they feel is overgrowth when they see something happening off the five versus what's happening within our city and within our purview. And we have developers that are already considering things 10 years down the road in the way that they're designing those projects from affordable areas all the way through. But we also need to support the retail aspect and have some features that are desirable to people.
Okay. And then in terms of dealing with transportation, you were talking about developing the metro more.
And they have that within their plan. I think people
Okay.
would be surprised to know that they've really forecasted not just the constituents that would live here, but that their commute and being eco-friendly and having a work-life balance.
Okay.
I love the metro.
Okay, so then since LA County Health created kind of a one-size-fits-all model on passing emergency health mandates, which we saw during the pandemic, what do you think about creating a separate health administration for this city that would be better suited maybe to the needs here?
I think we learned a lot in the pandemic. I certainly was on the front line at 6 Degrees. One of the things that didn't make sense would be fiscally would be having our own health administration. We still within LA County have resources that we can use, and I think having some of the autonomy to some of the issues that we were all kind of brushed with a broad stroke on in terms of the numbers. That didn't make sense. And I think the county heard us, and I think developing a collaborative relationship with LA County to continue to use the resources, have the autonomy that we need so that our businesses can stay open, so that we're not kind of brushed with everybody else's numbers. And so it's important to continue that relationship in a positive way. And I think they've learned a lot as well, that it wouldn't be reasonable to continue to kind of count everybody in the same way. Have a cookie cutter approach, I don't think ever works. But we were in a crisis, and I think hindsight always allows all of us to see what we can do differently. And I think we would all take a different approach.
Okay, so in the future, as opposed to breaking off and creating our own health agency, you think having discussions with LA County and figuring out ways to separate Santa Clarita from more
Absolutely.
populated areas? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
absolutely.
makes
Just
sense.
really kind of thinking outside of the box sometimes. And again, it's difficult in the middle of a crisis, and there was a lot of things that we didn't know at that time. But because we know so much more now, we can definitely create a better plan and create a better, maybe supplemental option for us as a community that wouldn't impact us fiscally by creating a whole medical administration around a crisis.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then when it comes to public safety, how do you feel the city's doing? Are we doing enough currently? If not, what more should we be doing?
Sure. I think even our sheriff's department can, be supported in this statement, in that we definitely need more opportunities for training, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's something I do as an HR practitioner. Having some trainings that allow people to understand the landscape and the community members that they serve. Those are all things that, if there was a collaborative conversation, I would recommend doing this from an HR space, understanding that the people part and training always enhances the overall institution or company. And because the sheriff's department has something built in, there could be maybe a collaboration for the nuances specific here that we could work with our Captain Diaz on. And again, having maybe consortiums and town hall meetings will allow these conversations to come forward. I know they do coffee with cops. I know that they are very engaged in our community, but just maybe having a perspective from a city council level, from somebody that does this with municipalities as a practitioner, I would love to kind of impart those types of things and recommendations, because they always lend to a more open conversation. So I definitely would want to be more collaborative and create opportunities for more training.
So when you refer to training, are you talking about training, sensitivity training,
Sure.
kind of creating a better connection between the sheriff's department and the community?
Absolutely. And then, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's I'm sure some of these in some of the things that they're doing specifically as a department, but then I think refining it to some of the dynamics that are specific to Santa Clarita. We're very unique, and our community has expanded in so many ways in our diversity and in even the 12 years that I've lived here. And I think staying ahead of those things and being engaged with them allow for a better relationship with our law enforcement and our community.
Okay. One last question.
Sure.
So, in a really concise way, in a couple of sentences,
Sure.
Why should residents vote for you?
Sure. I have an established record of service in our community already. With my practice, 6 Degrees HR Consulting, I have established relationships with our current city council members. I was nominated by Jason Gibbs, our current council member, to be on the Wish Education Foundation. We serve the students of Santa Clarita as a nonprofit. I've also on the Santa Clarita International Film Festival, and I know that Bill Miranda is on that. I am also always engaged as a community member with Serothimus, serving women, and that's not just in our community, but that's internationally. I've raised my kids here. I've built a business. I own a home. So I'm a stakeholder here. I'm invested in the results, and I think I want to share also, I am in no party preference. I was deliberate and intentional about that so that people understood that they have a voice on city council that is serving the people and not the politics. And I think people are, in my travels, are refreshed by that and often relieved. And in any moment, if we speak to someone about our affiliation, you could meet a friend or a foe. And I think that's just kind of the climate of our country right now. And so my candidacy has taken on a great energy because people see someone that is interested in serving the people. So I think that would be why.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for
Yes,
joining us
thank
today. It was
you.
a pleasure talking to you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. November 8th. It's coming up, 63 days.